My study is entitled A Policy Perspective on Unemployment in New Emerging Economies, and is written with my colleague, Associate Professor Bogdan PETRITOR. The major aspects of this paper included a brief introduction, then a literature investigation. Afterwards, we have presented the research methodology, and then our results that we obtained, and based on them we have presented some policy implications. During time, various labor market regulations were implemented in the EU member states in order to counteract the unemployment. Actually, an active labor market policy was considered to be a key aspect of the European employment strategy. All these programs related to employment and to counteract the unemployment were grouped into 6 categories. First of all, job training, incentives for the private sector, such as subsidies for employers who hire new workers, employment programs for the public sector, measures to stimulate job searching, programs for young persons, and programs for those with disabilities. In search for effective policies to reduce unemployment in Europe, analysts were looking for reasons for its occurrence, and it was noticed that during the 70s, Europe experienced 2 oil shocks, and this was considered to be a major cause. During the 1980s and 1990s, an endogenous cause of unemployment in the OECD European states was considered to be the low productivity level. Moreover, during the 90s, it was considered that formal and informal institutions that influence the entire labor market process were another major factor. The 2007-2008 crisis forced the European Union states to accelerate the reform of their employment protection policies, the benefits that they offered to the unemployed, and wage-setting processes. So the purpose of our paper is to conduct a statistical investigation of the labor market and business regulations' effects on unemployment in 11 new transition economies during the period 2000-2020. It was found that the European countries implemented the most important institutional transformations between 1980s and 2007. Actually, it was mentioned that 440 reforms were made in just 7 European states. After the 2008 recession, the number and the magnitude of these reforms increased. The institutional changes were more frequent when unemployment was high and the potential growth appears to be low. The reforms implemented by the European Union states after 2008 were grouped in 2 categories depending on their scope. The first group was initially in the beginning of the crisis, and the purpose of the institutional changes was to mitigate the impact of the crisis on employment. Subsequently, between 2010 and 2012, the reforms aimed to increase the adjustment capacity of the labor market, especially in the South and Southwest European Union states. These reforms helped researchers and the international organization to develop indicators of the institutional intensity of the labor market. And so we can see the OECD index of the strictness of employment protection legislation, which measures the level of unemployment benefits, the ratio of expenditure on active labor market policies to GDP, and the total tax wedge on low wages. Moreover, some other analysts used a set of 5 indicators in order to develop the economic freedom of the world index. Depending on the analyzed period and methodologies, we can see that there are 3 categories of researches on the consequences of labor market regulations on unemployment. The first generation was focused on the period 1970s-1990s, which used econometric techniques, and found that in Europe and United States, government employment programs had only limited effects on the labor market. The second generation was focused on the late 80s and the 90s and used more complex methodological analysis. These studies found that more rigid employment laws are associated with high levels of unemployment. And lastly, the third generation that was conducted since 2000, and this generation used non-experimental data in order to evaluate the efficiency of various labor market programs such as training programs, private sector incentive programs, services and sanctions, and youth programs. In order to achieve our purpose, the data was collected from the World Bank. The sample, as mentioned before, included 11 states, namely Bulgaria, Croatia, Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Romania, Slovak Republic, and Slovenia. The method we have used was focused on panel co-integration tests, and the instruments used for the econometric analysis were Stata 14, eViews, and Gauss 10. The panel co-integration coefficients showed that both labor market and business regulations had no significant effect on unemployment for the entire sample. Meanwhile, individual co-integration coefficients showed that market-oriented labor regulations are associated with lower unemployment in Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, and Slovak Republic, but higher unemployment in Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovenia. Moreover, market-oriented business regulations decreased unemployment in Czech Republic, Latvia, and Poland, but raised it in Croatia and Slovenia. And we found that a 1 unit increase in business regulation index decreased the unemployment by 4.3 times in Poland, 3.5 times in Latvia, and 0.52 times in the Czech Republic. Meanwhile, a 1 unit increase in business regulations index raised the unemployment by 6.6 times in Croatia and by 1.7 times in Slovenia. Our findings have some policy implications. We can say that labor laws should be more flexible in order to diminish the unemployment. Meanwhile, the policymakers should pay particular attention to educational system to match market requirements for labor with skills of potential employees. And here we can say that employment policies should be more oriented towards the mobility of the labor force, promoting employment restructuring and thus decreasing unemployment. And all programs aimed at decreasing unemployment should be designed in close cooperation with business, so that training meets the demands of employers. On the other hand, policymakers should focus on those reforms aimed at improving the business environment. This means reduce business risk by guaranteeing access to information to all participants and enhance competition by diminishing fiscal and bureaucratic burdens. Meanwhile, eliminating corruption is a very important aspect for stimulating the business environment and thus for increasing employment. Thank you for your attention.